Welcome to the TEFL Training Institute podcast, the bite-sized TEFL podcast for teachers, trainers, and managers.
Hi everyone.
Hello.
I was watching two CERT classes, one after the other, last week, and the students in the first class, in the first hour, learned all these ways of giving advice to each other. And in the second hour, the second teacher did something else about giving advice.
They have the same topic.
We pretty much did the same topic, yeah. Can you guess how many of the phrases for giving advice the students, so they just learned this in the first class, how many of them did they use in the second class?
One.
None.
Okay.
The students didn't use anything that they learned in the first hour in the class in the second hour. Amazing.
It's quite interesting because only 1 hour later and they forgot most of the language they learned and nobody used it. Do you think it's because of our brain or because the teacher didn't do enough to help the students to use the words?
I guess both. Did you not have some interesting thing that you read about this recently?
So the counseling services in the University of Waterloo published a paper talking about the memory curves. So
What's a memory curve?
Basically, the people find out on day one. At the end of the class, they know 100%.
Yeah.
So, you know what happened on day two?
Well, they forgot 50% or something.
Yeah, so if they didn't look at it or didn't do anything with it, they forgot 50 to 80% of what they learned.
Wow.
And then by day 30, do you know how much they can remember of what they learned from day one? 2 to 3%.
Gee, they forgot 97 to 98%.
Yeah, so because the students didn't do anything or the teacher didn't help them to review it, and that's what's going to happen to our brain and forget a lot of stuff.
So today, we're going to look at what does it mean to know a word?
And what are steps of presenting a new word to students? And number 3,
how can we help students remember language learned in class?
So we talk about what does it mean to know a word. So Ross, do you want to introduce some different aspects?
So I guess the most simple thing that I would do as a first year teacher is if I had a word like crash, I'd probably show students a flashcard of 2 cars crashed,
Nice.
and I'd say crash, crash, car crash, get the students to repeat, and that would be it. But there's actually a lot more to the word crash.
Like economic crash?
You could say your computer's crashed,
Yeah.
but you can't say, for example, broke up with my girlfriend, we had a relationship crash. So also teach students the ways the word can't be used as well as the ways it can be used.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I think there are a lot of situations and students just understand the meaning of the words, but actually using the wrong context or wrong situation.
So I guess a lot of the time in class we focus on that basic meaning of the word, but actually some of the other things that you can teach the students are collocations. So I heard the other week a student saying, oh, I eat McDonald's all the time. I love eating rubbish food. And I guess what happened there is someone taught them the word rubbish, they taught the word junk, and they said, oh, they mean the same thing. And that student assumes that if you can say junk food, you can say rubbish food. But actually, you can't say rubbish food. So that's collocation, and that different words go with other words.
So any other aspects?
I guess another important one is the connotations around the word. One from the lexical approach, he talks about the word cup. What's a cup?
It's a container for liquid.
Good. What's a goblet?
It's a container.
For liquid, right?
Yeah.
The same thing. But if you look at the connotation of the two, cup and goblet, completely different. Cup is something you use in everyday situations, but a goblet is more like something that you would expect to see in Game of Thrones, or you see a king drinking out of a goblet, which kind of leads on to the next one.
The frequency?
So which is going to be more frequent, cup or goblet? Obviously cup is much, much more frequent. So important to teach students how often words occur. Is it a common word or not?
Reminds me of observing 2 years ago, and the teacher from Australia taught the students the time marker for the future on next Friday week.
Next Friday week.
Yeah. So that's the first time I heard of it. And after the class, I asked the teacher, how often do you use it? Not very often. How often do you hear people saying it? Not very often. So why did you teach that? Well, just maybe once or twice in their life, and they're going to encounter the words when they're going to Australia, so they probably can understand. And I said, do you use it? No. So why do you teach them? Because you imagine when people said next Friday week, they won't be able to be understood. So we have the quote, teach what's probable, not what's possible.
Good. So What steps should teachers go through when teaching new words to students?
The education researcher and teacher, Robert Marzano, he talked about the steps in his book, Teaching Basic and Advanced Vocabulary. So the first step is the teacher explains the new words and introduce the meaning and how to pronounce the words.
So if you say explains, does that mean are the students, can they guess the words or?
I think you can use different methods to get the meaning across, but mainly you have to make sure the students understand it and they know the basic meaning of the new language. And second step is students, they explain the word in their own words.
So what would that look like or sound like in class?
You can ask them to find a substitution. If you are teaching the word hold when people are calling each other.
Well, this is like if you're calling a helpline or calling your bank.
Yeah, you can't say, oh, wait, when you are speaking over the phone.
Or you'd be much more likely to say hold instead of wait.
Yeah. However, and if the students can find the equivalent words or similar words to explain the meaning of that means they're able to use their own words to explain.
I guess also nice to get students to personalize whatever the word is, right? And get to think about, if it's teaching the word hold, you can ask the students, can you tell me about a time when you've been put on hold?
I think that's the next step.
Okay.
Ask students to create a non-linguistic representation. Can be a picture or think of a personalized example, or when the students last time asked somebody to hold on the phone. Stuff like that. So for this step, I think just help students to
make a connection, I guess, right?
Associate the words to their own life and own experience. To be honest, I think that's so important. You ask the students to make a list of new vocabulary and find the definition in the dictionary and then try to memorize the words. It's still working, but it won't as effective as the way and make it more personalized or connected to their own experience.
Right. What's the fourth step?
The number 4, just the students, they are engaged in activity and to deepen their knowledge of the new word. So basically, the teacher need to prepare some task or activity to allow them use the vocabulary.
So just coming up with a task that lets the students use the new words. And I guess giving the students feedback on how they use the words afterwards.
Yeah. And the 5th step is called students' discussion in pairs or in groups. But I would say it's more about reflection between the learners. Because, for example, you can ask them some very simple questions. Okay, which word you didn't know before and which word you feel more confident to use after class, and give them the chance to find out the gap, what they didn't know and what they know now, and then they know in the future what they can use for the similar situation. I think here maybe we can give them some other simple tasks.
Well, like you're not saying at the beginning about how people forget most things within a day, so reviewing is really important, that you make sure that new words get recycled and that students look over them after class so they still remember them from their short-term memory into their long-term memory.
And here and related to the learner autonomy as well. So maybe the teacher can introduce some strategies or some materials, songs or movies or TV, and include this kind of words they introduce in the class and help them to encounter the words again in the future. Because you can see within a month, they forget most of it. And if you imagine they keep watching or listening to the music or watch the movies or TV on a regular basis, and this can help them to memorize it. Yeah.
Well, I think that leads us on to the last question, which is how can we help students to remember vocabulary? So just for a change, because I know you're getting tired of Penny Ur, can I quote Jack Richards instead?
Sure, please.
Make sure that your students are acquiring new vocabulary every day, really. For speaking, where we'll use a restricted set of words, maybe 3,000 or 4,000, we'll acquire those words through practice, but also through repeated opportunities to use them. And that's why it's important to constantly review vocabulary, to find activities for students which focus on the words that they've studied, the words that they've encountered, use those words in their speech and writing wherever they can.
You can hear from that, it's really a priority for students to learn and remember lots of new words. But from what you were saying at the beginning, if within a month of class students forget 98%, what are some ways that we can help students remember?
So when we organize the new words, and we can do different ways. The first one is to put them in a personalizing group. For example, maybe there were 10 words introduced in the class. So I can make a very simple mind map and have personalized examples to help me memorize it. But
I remember I used to get students at the end of class, if you had like 10 or 15 new words on the board and you say, all right, for 2 minutes, you have to use at least 10 of these these 50 new words and write a very, very short story in one paragraph, just using all these words. And it helps people kind of personalize the language and remember it.
And the second way to organize them is based on the language.
So is this like putting them into categories, like nouns, verbs, adjectives, that kind of thing?
Maybe with the same prefix or same suffix. Yeah. And the third one is called the real world groups. So for example, the body parts, maybe different type of weather,
lexical sets or something. Yeah. Which is interesting because there's also a lot of dangers associated with teaching vocabulary in lexical sets.
Did you read something recently talking about
so
this?
there's an article by a guy called Nation, and he talks about how if you teach language in lexical sets, so for example, if you teach all the body parts together, or you teach all the days of the week together, students have to spend twice as long trying to memorize the words as if you teach them not together in those lexical sets. So he says, like, you should never teach, for example, hot and cold, or Tuesday and Thursday at the same time. Actually, I remember when I was 4 years old or something, learning left and right, and kept getting them mixed up for ages, because you know what they are, right? But you forget which one is which.
Okay, interesting. That's something that we believed before, and now it turns out actually didn't work really well, because I remember I always introduced like the opposites, like talking about people's appearance, like tall, and short, and all the different opposites.
It's really easy to get them confused. Obviously, one of the problems with doing this is that most course books have everything organized in lexical sets, or most of the course books I've used. If you have to follow a course book, what you can do is you can still teach, for example, hot and cold at the same time, but you might use them differently. So, for example, you say, like the weather is really hot, let's have a cold drink. Rather than using these substitutions of like the weather is hot, the weather is cold, the drink is hot, the drink is cold.
Interesting.
So still using a context like, we're in Spain, the weather's very hot. What should we do? Let's go and buy a cold drink.
Just go back to the class I talked about, like I introduced short, tall, short, and high. So there were two opposites. So I didn't just give them the different context. I just said, okay, these words, they are opposites. So during the class, I've heard students said, that boy, it's much higher than the other one. So you can see I didn't give them your hot and cold context switch. So they just messed them up.
Yeah. Have you ever heard this thing of like students have to see the same word many, many times before they can remember it?
So how many times?
Different researchers say different amounts, but they say that students are able to encounter a word 5 to 20 times before they're able to memorize it.
Wow.
So I think one of those problems is that often in course books and in classes, teachers will focus on whatever 5 or 10 words for an hour, and then they just disappear. Whereas what we really want to do is make sure that those words get recycled so that they're in the first class and they're in the next class, and the teacher reminds them. Like my example at the start of even just the next hour, the students didn't use any of the words for giving suggestions. Recycle, I think that's the key word here, isn't it? Recycle some of that language and keep giving feedback on the language that the students heard last week or 5 classes ago.
Okay, so to summarize, Ross, how can we help the teachers who listen to our podcast remember the information, not forget 50 to 70% of the information we talked about?
Take notes while you're listening. Give personal examples to yourself of how these things might have applied in your classes. So, for example, I always teach things in lexical sets, and then go, okay, don't do this in future. Make a plan for how you might do it differently, and then come back to the notes after you've taught a class and reflect on how well you've been able to apply those things. And I think that will help you do it. But I don't think it takes a lot of time, right?
Just need to spend like 4 minutes
per day?
Yeah, per day. So from 2 to 3% what they can remember, day 30 is almost 100% what they can remember.
Just from spending 4 minutes a day.
Yeah, you can see it's just make a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the thing to take away is that we obviously spend so much time preparing classes, teaching classes, reflecting on classes. But actually, one of the main things that we need to help students to focus on is how to remember what they've learned in the class. If they go out and forget 98% of what we taught them, then it's a waste of time.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening.
See you next time. If you've got a question or a topic that you'd like us to discuss, send us an email or leave us a comment.
If you'd like to listen to more podcasts, please visit our website
www.tefltraininginstitute.com.